Hi class, this is Unit 3, the sixth extinction crisis. So, as you may have heard of, thousands of species could be lost over the next several decades due to what is termed the Earth's sixth extinction crisis. And this is primarily due to human civilization, habitat destruction, overexploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive species are the most important causes that have been driven by us humans. In this unit, we're going to learn what scientists mean when they say biodiversity, why biodiversity is vital for the continuity of human society, how evolution generates biodiversity, how diverse species live together in interconnected communities and ecosystems, the current reasons for species extinction, and how we can decrease extinction rates by creating protected areas. So the first module is understanding biodiversity. And so what is biodiversity? We're going to distinguish between genetic diversity, species diversity, taxonomic diversity, ecosystem diversity. And biodiversity generally refers to species diversity. But first, we're going to go through genetic diversity, which is the amount of genetic variation that occurs between populations and some species. Genetic diversity is the result of differences and similarities in genes, which are the segments of DNAs in our chromosomes between individuals. An example is that modern humans all belong to the same species, Homo sapiens, right? We're all Homo sapiens, but each of us is genetically unique. And the average difference between individuals is about 0.1%. Nearly all Californian condors are bred in captivity and released in the wild. This recent studies have shown that there are high levels of genetic diversity in condors, even though they've been bred in captivity. And populations need genetic diversity in order to adapt to threats such as new diseases or climate change. Species diversity is the number of species in an area, and a species is a group of similar looking individuals that are capable of interbreeding and producing offspring that are also fertile. This is also referred to as fertility and well-being. Bee pollinating strawberry plants. Research from the New Jersey area shows that between 40 and 80 species of bees are needed to successfully pollinate the area's blueberry, cranberry, and watermelon crops. So species diversity is extremely important to maintain. For example, in agriculture, 75% of our crop species are pollinated by insects. Some are obviously pollinated by wind. These species that are native to North America, Bee species that are native to North America can provide better pollination services than honeybees, which were imported from Europe and Asia. So the next time you see a bee and you see a honeybee, just remember they're not exactly native. And we have native bees that are incredibly important to support because they do better pollination than non-native honeybees. The number of species in a given area is known as species richness. Species richness is also increased by the physical features of an area. This is called topographical variation. Species richness is reduced by the peninsula effect, in which diversity decreases as a function of distance from the mainland of a body. In this example that you see, species richness in North America follows a polar equatorial gradient, meaning that contour lines show equal number of species. You may have heard of the term biodiversity hotspots, which means that it is a region that can meet two criteria. It must contain at least 1,500 species of plants as endemics. Endemics refer to animals or plants that exist nowhere else except that region, and they must have at least lost 70% of its original habitat. That's why it's a hotspot. It's confined to 30% or less of the original landmass. Plants were chosen as the primary group of organisms to determine whether or not an area qualifies as a hotspot, mainly because most other terrestrial organisms depend on it. And we're going to cover that later on. These are examples of animals found within the Madagascar biodiversity hotspot. Um, there is the panther chameleon. Half of all chameleon species are found in Madagascar, the very unique and characteristic baobab tree, and lemurs, which are only found in Madagascar, are super unique. And this one is the Coquerelus sifaka, a specific species of lemur. The location of the world's major biodiversity hotspots. Conservationists have identified areas in 34 hotspots that together occupies a mere 2.3% of the Earth's surface, but together contain 150,000 plant species, or 50% of the total plant endemics. Protecting geographic hotspots will prevent the extinction of a larger number of endemic species that than would protecting areas of a similar size elsewhere. Usually biodiversity hotspots are found within what is the tropics as well as the southern hemisphere because of the higher heat levels, the weather patterns, etc. If you notice, the tropics and warmer climates allows for greater diversity of species. And that's also due to more plants, right? Plants need sunlight to photosynthesize, and so more plants, more animals to eat, greater diversity. Taxonomic diversity, okay? Taxonomic diversity basically refers to the classification of animals. So, taxonomy is the science of organizing living and extinct species into hierarchical groups. In hierarchical groups, one group is ranked above another. The human body is even hierarchical. At a basic level, we consist of cells, which are then aggregated into tissues, which can create muscle or nervous tissue. Tissues can then be organs such as the heart and the liver. So, taxonomic diversity helps us describe how many groups of species are found in a certain area. Taxonomic diversity continued. The most species-rich taxonomic group is insects, with over 1 million species. Okay, the jewel bug beetle is one of over 400,000 described species, far more than any other insect group, and that is a beetle. So the standard way of naming organisms is known as binomial nomenclature. All species on Earth have a unique two-part name. The first name is the genus, which contains species which are closely related but do not interbreed. The second name refers only to the species. Each genus may have several species. That's why we are part of the genus Homo and the species Sapien. Here you can see the species richness of major taxonomic groups, okay? But please remember that so many species have not been discovered, and it's approximately 1.7 million species that have been, but there is expected millions and millions more that have not been. Ecosystem diversity examines the diversity and structure within ecosystems found in a region such as tropical forests, grassland, deserts, or hot springs. And so understanding how a landscape, instead of just a community or a population or several populations, overall the landscape is ecosystem diversity. So more factors come into play here. That is all for this lesson. We're going to continue to listen to understanding biodiversity. In this lesson, we'll explore the value of biodiversity as a source of natural resources, such as fish and timber, and in providing ecosystem services, such as clean air and water, and why is it vital to maintain the Earth's biodiversity. There are three overarching reasons why maintaining biodiversity is important for humans. Number one, society benefits from biodiversity since it's a source of natural products. Here you can see a honeybee on a flower. Later on, the nectar that honeybee takes creates something that we eat, honey. Diverse ecosystems provide services that ensure an array of central benefits, such as clean air and water. This is something that we covered in the bottled water unit. And finally, this is an intrinsic value. We have an ethical responsibility to protect other species. It's not just all the benefits that biodiversity gives us. We also need to acknowledge that we have a responsibility, that we as advanced creatures need to protect other things. Why is biodiversity important to medicine? The value of biodiversity to the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is heavily dependent on plant, animal, fungal, and bacterial products. In 2020, prescription drug sales were valued at over 350 billion in the US and 1.25 trillion worldwide. A reduction in the diversity of natural habitats, such as tropical forests, is thought to have resulted in increased outbreaks of diseases. From a human perspective, access to nature has been shown to improve mental health. Okay, an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 plant species are used in modern and traditional medicine. Taxol from the bark of the Pacific yew tree is an anti-cancer drug used in the treatment of breast cancer and other cancers. Aloe, the thick juice from the aloe plant from tropical Africa, contains a chemical called aleurin, which helps in soothing sunburn. Quinine is an anti-malarial drug, comes from the bark of the cinchona tree, and colchicine from the meadow saffron plant has been used to suppress some types of cancer and treat rheumatism and gout. Animal products are also important to the pharmaceutical industry. For example, glucosamine derived from shellfish is used to treat joint pain. Remarine, first derived from pregnant mare urine, is a hormone replacement therapy used to treat symptoms associated with female menopause. Protein from the South American pit viper snake helps control human blood pressure. So, as you can see, we use these medications all the time. However, deforestation decreases the presence of large animals and increases the number of smaller animals. Shorter-lived smaller animals invest less in their immune systems and are more likely to become infected with diseases. Development brings humans into more frequent contact with smaller animals such as rodents and bats, aka COVID-19. So you can see how deforestation can really affect us, not just biodiversity. And as I mentioned previously, forests and other natural areas have a positive impact on people's mental health. This is not just like word of mouth. There are scientific studies proving this, including how brain waves are measured during people being out in nature, significantly improving or becoming a little bit more calmer, or what scientists refer to as calmer. Why is biodiversity important to agriculture? So there are more than 250 species of cattle worldwide. Some, like the Brahman cattle, live in hot climates, and other, like the Scottish Highland cow, are bred to survive in a cold and snowy winter. Wild relatives of crops provide a useful reservoir of genetic material for developing pest-resistant varieties or strains that can grow in marginal areas. And pollinator diversity, as I mentioned before, is vital to maximize the pollination of crops. A natural product is a living organism or substance produced by a living organism. It is found in nature rather than being grown specifically for harvesting by humans. So maple syrup, honey, and commercial fishing is all considered natural products. Here is a great table of ecosystem services provided by the environment and how they contribute either directly or indirectly to human well-being. Please keep this chart in mind for your exam. Biodiversity and ecosystem services. In 2014, the economist Robert Costanza and his colleagues made an attempt to calculate the monetary value of ecosystem services to various economies. And this is in 2007 dollars, so don't take into account inflation. They came to the conclusion that at the time, the world's ecosystems were worth more than $124 trillion a year, nearly twice the gross national product of all the world's economies combined. At that point, it was only $75.2 trillion for the GDP of all the world's countries combined. Here we have a beautiful mountain watershed. What you can clearly see is forests, pristine mountains, clear water, and all of this flows and gives different materials, water, clean air to the people down the area. So that needs to be valued, not just monetarily, but intrinsically. And that's why there are ethical reasons to preserve biodiversity. John Muir, one of the most famous preservationists of the 19th century and founder of the Sierra Club, thought that natural areas have great spiritual value and should be preserved for their own sake. The idea that nature has intrinsic value and deserves protection is known as preservationist ethic. This contrasts with the resource conservation ethic, which focuses on the management of natural areas to allow the wisest in current and future use of natural resources. The preservationist ethic underpins the foundation of the U.S. national park system, and indeed is preserved in all preserved areas of the world. John Muir helped also establish one of the world's first national parks, and that is Yosemite. And he really believed that they should just be preserved, areas should be preserved for their own sake. So this is in contrast to the USDA and the US Forest Service, which does allow for resource extraction in sustainable manners. Lesson 3. How do changes in biodiversity affect ecosystems function? In this lesson, we will examine the relationship between ecosystem function and ecosystem and species richness. So, ecosystem functions are the biological processes that control the movement of energy, nutrients, and organic materials through an ecosystem and include the ability to convert resources into new biomass. Here in this example, we have prairie plants, little blue stem, flowering spurge, and blazing star, which, by the way, we also have here in South Florida. Research has shown that the number of plant species in the Midwest drops, and there is a decrease in ecosystem functions such as plant biomass production and nutrient uptake from the soil. Several models explain the relationship between ecosystem function and species richness. Here you have 3 different hypotheses. The proportional loss hypothesis is a straight line relationship between ecosystem function and species richness. As the number of species richness decreases, ecosystem function decreases proportionally. In the redundancy hypothesis, ecosystem function would decrease slowly as species are lost. Only when diversity is very low does ecosystem function drop meaningfully. This means that that many species are functionally redundant. And finally, the last one is the immediate catastrophe hypothesis, which suggests that ecosystem services decline very quickly even after small losses in biodiversity. In this scenario, a full complement of species is necessary for ecosystems to function properly. Now, different ecosystems can follow different models, so not all ecosystems will have each hypothesis model. In the mid-1990s, scientists performed field experiments in Minnesota grasslands to determine how species richness affected ecosystem functioning. They sowed experimental plots with seeds of 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, or 24 species of prairie plants. The data supported the redundancy hypothesis. Plots with more species had increased productivity compared to plots with fewer species. Okay. And also, compared to the species poor plots, the species rich plots had more nutrients, such as nitrates. Okay. So they didn't only just compare species richness and plant cover, they also looked at a molecular level at the actual nitrates in the rooting zones of those prairie plants. Field experiments have explored the relationship, right? So these data support, as we saw, the redundancy hypothesis. The frequency of invasive plant species not originally planted in the plots, decreased with increased plant species richness because it made the plots more resilient, more able to withstand invasion by non-natives. So the sampling effect may also contribute to the relationship between species richness and ecosystem function. Some species grow larger than others and have higher productivity, which may regard them as super species that outperform average species in the area. As a community accrues more species, the likelihood of containing a super species increases by chance alone. Different plant species grow to different heights, meaning that species-rich plots with plants of different sizes can utilize light efficiently at many different levels of the plant canopy. Different plant species tend to also have different root lengths, so they can also tap into the soil moisture and absorb nutrients at different depths. As an analogy, just to help you guys, investors who buy a diverse portfolio of stocks are more likely to buy a super stock that outperforms the other than those that only invest in one or two stocks. In summary, it's really important for humans to preserve biodiversity. It is of great value to the pharmaceutical industry. It helps prevent the spread of emergent diseases. It increases agricultural production, and it provides life-giving ecological services such as clean water and air and pollinators for our crops. Equally important, it's just important to conserve biodiversity for its own sake. For this lesson, here are the critical thinking questions I want you guys to consider and to think about before your exam. Thanks.